Hello, this is a video where I'll be explaining to you the first intermediate period of the ancient Egypt. So the first intermediate period of ancient Egypt was sort of like, it was considered a dark age for many centuries to come in ancient Egypt. But anyhow, so the first intermediate period was 130 years of political instability, famine, and life generally sucked for the average Egyptian, although the Middle Kingdom texts obviously exaggerated it because it wasn't like apocalyptically bad or anything. But anyway, so why did the first intermediate period happen to begin with? Well, before we can look at the first intermediate period, we'll look at the period that came before it, the Old Kingdom. This was basically the era in Egyptian history where the pyramids and sphinx were built. And it was one of the three golden ages of ancient Egypt. And like, ancient Egypt was very prosperous during it, but the Old Kingdom eventually collapsed. Here's why I think it collapsed personally. So the Old Kingdom of Egypt was very, very, very stable and prosperous in the beginning. And a lot of people say that they shouldn't have built the pyramids, or at least not made them as big, because it costs a lot of resources, and they say that's the reason why the Old Kingdom collapsed. But I disagree. Because the pyramids helped improve the stability of the nation. What I think is this: there were basically almost no wars during the Old Kingdom, which meant that the population increased and there was a food surplus. So Egypt was just generally super, super prosperous during the Old Kingdom. But that led, by the way, during the Old Kingdom, ancient Egypt was not just an absolute monarchy, but it was like the most absolute, much more absolute than the Middle Kingdom and the New Kingdom. Anyhow, because of this, since the more people exists in a nation, the harder it is to govern. So because the population increased, the Old Kingdom needed nomarchs or governors of various different provinces to serve him on his behalf. So he basically had to give more autonomy. However, due to the royal absolutist system, this sort of went, and the refusal to reform meant that the system was completely, it basically contradicted each other. So the nomarchs gained more and more power, and eventually there were several, during the Sixth Dynasty, this was a real problem because the king became a figurehead, basically. You know what I'm saying? So, then Pepi II came to power. Well, Pepi II was only 6 years old when he became king. So, a lot of the nomarchs or governors were like, let's spoil him, let's make him weak and easy to control. So, the nomarchs eventually, when Pepi became an adult, he was a very incompetent ruler and could make a lot of the decisions for himself. And even worse, he became incredibly old. Like he became like 100 years old. So many of his children and even grandchildren died. So when Pepi died, the only heir he had was like extremely old, and he died very shortly after his father died. So the Sixth Dynasty, the last dynasty of the Old Kingdom, died out. And that meant that previously, ancient Egypt didn't need, could just get a new dynasty. But since the nomarchs were so powerful, they decided, you know what, let's become kings. Let's just become kings ourselves. And that led to Egypt basically collapsing. Plus, there was a lot of drought, famine. And remember, these nomarchs, they didn't just want to be controlling their nomes or provinces. They wanted to be the ruler of the entirety of the shattered country. So they went to war with a lot of other nomarchs. Now, the ninth dynasty of a lot of the nomarchs were like insignificant in the long term because they sort of just died out or lost wars to other nomarchs. But there was there were a few dynasties that were notable. For example, the ninth dynasty. The ninth dynasty of ancient Egypt, or the House of Keti, alternatively. Also, keep in mind that these dynasties, the ninth, the 10th, etc., they coexisted with each other during the first intermediate period. But anyhow, um, uh, the ninth dynasty was initially the most powerful one of these families. However, what was it? Their home city of what was it? Heracleopolis, otherwise in Egyptian called Nesut. That was their capital, and there they weren't very popular even there in the beginning. So in name only did they control the majority of Egypt. But sooner or later they gained more control and were the most powerful dynasty of ancient Egypt. However, Upper Egypt, basically the southern part, there was a lot of people were not satisfied with the House of Keti ruling over them. So they just like there were a lot of warring nomes. Ankhtifi, he directly or he indirectly was trying to become, or he was indirectly challenging the ninth dynasty, even though he came to be a servant of his. And Thebes, they were just officially like not a part of the ninth dynasty's realm of control. So Antifi unsuccessfully attacked Thebes, and Antifi sort of just died, I guess. And Thebes then became the most powerful. At first, Thebes was also, in theory, I think I contradicted myself, but I think Thebes also, in theory, was a servant of the ninth dynasty in Heracleopolis. But sooner or later, Thebes decided to claim their own dynasty, and um, they were the 11th dynasty. And so the ninth dynasty of Lower Egypt, Northern Egypt, and the 11th of Upper Egypt, they sort of became enemies. And there was a huge war between them that lasted many years. Um so, however, the 11th dynasty ended up winning the war. And I think it is because the ninth dynasty was extremely brutal and used force, almost exclusively force alone, which meant that they were not really particularly popular. Also, the 11th dynasty in Thebes was not particularly popular either because they levied, like pretty much they levied heavy taxes on other nomes, and they went to Thebes straight up. So a lot of but they were still more popular than the 11th or the ninth dynasty. And a huge mistake the ninth dynasty made was when they captured Abydos. It was the burial place of Egypt's earliest kings that united Egypt. They sacked the city, including the burial tombs of many other previous pharaohs like Narmer, Hor-Aha, these very early pharaohs. That caused them to lose the support of the people. And the 11th dynasty exploited this by launching a complete propaganda war, which, I mean, if you were an average Egyptian, you would want the 11th dynasty to win because of this. So the 11th dynasty, they ended up getting an absolute Giga Chad as their king, Mentuhotep II. And I consider him to be as good as Narmer. I think he should be called Mentuhotep the Great, honestly. But Mentuhotep, we don't know much details about the war because this happened like 4,000 years ago. But Mentuhotep, he marched his army across the country. took Nesut, the capital, or otherwise known as Heracleopolis, and united Egypt, bringing an end to the first intermediate period and causing the creation of the Middle Kingdom. Um, uh, but again, Egypt was still quite unstable even after he took power because, I mean, a lot of people didn't like thieves. So he had to create a police state like the Soviet Union, basically. And the Heraklion, the Nesut prison, I like to call Heracleopolis Nesut, but the Nesut prison, a lot of people who opposed Mentuhotep's regime were sent there. And that was pretty much the end of the first intermediate period. And the 11th dynasty ruled for a bit longer and was replaced by the legendary 12th, which is when the Middle Kingdom began, which is the second golden age. The first one being the Old Kingdom. But anyways, that's about it.